Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ana Maria Toronto, Vice President of Marketing at Synzi. Welcome to today's webinar, which will highlight the latest technology trends and discuss the implications for healthcare executives, providers, and patients. Key topics will include why healthcare needs the cloud, the role of virtual care versus telehealth, machine learning in the healthcare cloud, the importance of user experience, and innovating with compliance. All attendees are muted during today's presentation. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, please type your question into the chat window on your control panel. At the conclusion of today's webinar, we'll review the questions and our presenters will answer them accordingly. Today, we welcome topic experts Matt Ferrari, Chief Technology Officer at ClearData, and Mark Knudsen, Chief Technology Officer at Synzi, who will share their expert insights. Matt has been one of the most influential leaders in cloud computing since his earliest days in the industry, starting at Hosting.com, where he built the company's award-winning public cloud platform. He joined ClearData in 2014 and launched the first healthcare-exclusive AWS cloud platform. As CTO, he leads the teams that are integral to the company's rapid growth, product strategy and vision, product management, and product development, contributing to 100% plus growth for the past several years. Earlier in his career, he was recognized as a Microsoft hero in the book Heroes Happen Here. His professional reputation and mentorship of technology entrepreneurs led to his selection as one of Colorado's top 40 executives under 40, 2 years in a row. Mark is charged with managing the overall client interaction and performance of Synzi's technology, platform, and solutions. He works across engineering, IT, marketing, and sales to ensure market and client requirements are incorporated into the product roadmap. Mark has over 20 years of experience spanning solution strategy, software development, and professional services. Previously with Stratus Video's telehealth division as the Vice President of Product Innovation, Mark also led CareCloud's professional services organization, establishing support for enterprise clients by enhancing services capabilities and aligning product and operations teams with client requirements. We'll kick off the conversation today with Matt Ferrari, sharing his viewpoint on why healthcare is moving to the cloud.
Great. Well, thank you, Ana Maria, for the introduction, and really excited to be joined here with Mark, so thank you both. I really wanted to start off by taking a big picture look at healthcare in cloud and really talk about why the massive shift is happening. And I'll be brief because most of you folks out there have probably already dipped your toe in cloud, or maybe you're refactoring your application to be cloud native. But really wanted to talk about where the adoption is coming from. And while we're going to talk about technology today, it's not just about tech. It's also about improving your ability to drive better patient outcomes. And candidly, that's why I'm excited to talk today with Synzi, because that is really what they're doing. And so here are kind of just a handful of advantages that I hear every day. First off, we all know in healthcare, traditionally known as, in many cases, a laggard, specifically in the provider space when it comes to adopting cutting edge technology. There's been this move from CapEx to OpEx, or move away from traditional infrastructure and data centers into how can I operationalize and change my cost models. And so major advantages from a cloud perspective. In addition, really advantages around transforming your IT strategy, how you can now think about not a 3 or 5 year or 7 year burn on both software and hardware, but instead really adopt more operational, practical, and almost agile practices, both on the technology side as well as just the day-to-day operational or change management side of the business. What we've also seen is researchers that are storing and using massive data sets, and that has driven a major adoption to the cloud. Everyone, of course, knows, and actually I have to speak on it a lot now, the recent changes from a things like GDPR perspective, and really driving different requirements as it relates to not only how to share data, but how long to actually store data based off of type of PHI or PII. And then finally, the obvious one from a migration to the cloud, the scalability, the agility, the security around it. 4-5 years ago, when someone like ClearData started with public cloud, certainly one of the biggest concerns was around security and compliance. But as we'll talk about today, what we've seen is that the 3 largest public cloud providers have really focused actually the majority of their R&D at this point on new services as it relates to security, compliance, machine learning, AI, all these kind of technologies that drive not only scalability and agility, but ultimately security. So as we move into the next slide, I wanted to really start off with a case study. I think that this would probably be helpful to frame the conversation. And Genoa Healthcare really focuses on pharmacy services, and their why is really to improve quality of life for individuals that have behavioral health or mental illness issues through a higher level of pharmacy and psychiatry services from a tele perspective. And really important to ensure mental health patients have the right meds at the right time. And what they had traditionally was a lot of pain points. And you can see them up here on the screen. And I'm not a read the slide kind of guy, so I'll tell you to my own words. Their challenge was rapid growth. How could they add 50 pharmacies a year? Now with over 400 sites in 46 states, how do they do that when they are doing over 1 million prescriptions a month? And it was really struggling from a scalability perspective and concerns around, as we scale and open up all these new pharmacies, how do we do it in a secure and compliant fashion? And in addition to that, they were kind of in this acquisition phase. They wanted to bring new products into the market, and they really couldn't do that without really either slowing down their current, data center capital intensive deployment model, or running risk from a compliance and security perspective. And so that's why they looked to cloud. And someone like an organization I work for at ClearData, what we did was we came in and thought about, from a technology perspective, how could we do things like data mapping, understanding where PHI and PII lives inside of the environment to help them build a migration plan to the cloud. And oftentimes you hear that in healthcare as a security risk assessment. And ultimately it led to a lot of core benefits. And if we move to the next slide, you can see what those are, right? A lot of the benefits that they saw were around redundancy, being able to actually do live failovers of their environment without having to worry about data center capacity issues from a transformer or capacity perspective, or adding additional servers, these kind of things. Really focusing on compliance and security. And as we talk about emerging technology a lot today, we're going to also talk about what that means in the world of compliance and security, from a visibility perspective, really understanding not only how to scale inside of a public cloud, but how do you actually do it while really focusing on rigor around compliance and security? And ultimately, the benefits that an organization like Genoa saw is they could now expand their pharmacies at scale without having to risk any kind of security incident or even worse, and really controlling their costs by understanding that they can use public cloud existing capacity on demand, depending on when they have spikes inside of their prescription deployment. And so that's just one example that I wanted to share to kick things off. And ultimately, we're seeing the role of how patients get help really evolve beyond just this example, using cloud services and using really amazing healthcare technology. And so as we transition, Mark, can you kind of give your thoughts on the advancements from a telehealth perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. It's interesting, as Matt said at the beginning, the key focus, I think, for himself and ClearData and myself and Cindy and like organizations is that focus on outcomes. How do you improve quality for patients? How do you improve their experience? How do you improve efficiency and utilization for providers and for payers as well? And so when we look at emerging technology, we always want to keep that outcomes goal and target, in front of us, so that we're not looking at technology just for its own sake, but really how it's helping across the board or across the spectrum of constituents. And from kind of building onto the cloud opportunity and what that can start to do for a healthcare organization, I think telehealth and then the concept and evolution into virtual care is another interesting example. It's not necessarily a case study of a particular organization, but more of a general solution case study. If we think about telehealth historically, it's been more of a point solution. You can see here on the slide anything from live video to asynchronous communications, remote patient monitoring, and really kind of an ongoing evolution and an experiment with what does it mean to have mobile health and how can you take advantage of new technologies to get into the hands and sort of lives of patients and improve those outcomes. And I think what the cloud enables is the evolution of telehealth into the concept of virtual care, because now you can move past point solutions and point technologies, and you can really operationalize solutions that leverage technology but come together in a way that was not possible beforehand. So the ability to really deliver healthcare across different access points, maintaining, potentially even improving quality where you're closing gaps in delivery, and certainly speed to conversation, speed to care delivery, that whole timing aspect is enabled by a cloud foundation, and then how do you start to implement and deliver a solution on that cloud? So if we continue kind of looking at what does virtual care look like, one of the things that's great is it is, as Matt said earlier, a move from CapEx to operating expense. So it's not additional investment in technology infrastructure. It's how do you leverage the infrastructure that you have to deliver more innovative new solutions that improve the care delivery experience for all constituents. Again, providers, payers, and patients all can benefit from this. So if we think about what does it look practically to say, virtual care in a workflow. One thing that it does is it lets a healthcare provider take their existing staff, their existing clinical providers, and offer that expertise in that care delivery through the technology to colleagues, to patients, and to other partners outside of a physical setting. And so that ability for current staff to engage remotely starts to break down the barriers of geography and facilities. It also lets that staff deliver their expertise, not necessarily when they're in the office or in the hospital, but from wherever they might be, which provides a lot of flexibility. And for a health system that's distributed across facilities, certainly a lot more efficiency and leverage of that expertise that's already within the staff. And by extension, that expertise gets delivered to patients outside of just an in-person facility type appointment. So it's not necessarily the potentially stereotype of telehealth where it's addressing cough, sneeze, type situation, and it's a third-party provider that's augmenting, a health system's staff. Now it's the direct staff who are extending their reach into the community in a way that they couldn't without the technology enabling it. So now you can reach patients where they are with care from their known providers, wherever those providers might be. And so, let's take a look from the patient perspective, because again, we've got lots of constituents here in terms of bringing together a solution that is a win for everybody. And I think the great news is that consumer interest or patient interest in the concept of virtual care is very high. So the infographic you see here is a study of 5,000 consumers that was done in 2017. You see very high and certainly majority interest across a range of care delivery opportunities to take advantage of technology, to take advantage of an interaction that is not physically in the same space. I think for our conversation today, it's helpful to kind of pick one area to focus on, and it plays into some of what Matt will talk about coming up in terms of compliance and requirements for compliance. But one area where consumers or patients are very interested in using this virtual care are factors that are related to what happens when they leave the care facility. And so if you look at post-hospital discharge, which has an impact for both providers and payers in terms of cost and penalties and just how do you deliver high quality care efficiently, consumers or patients are ready to partner with new ways of receiving care and engaging in care delivery. So let's talk a little bit about what a virtual care visit might look like. And I think one of the things that's important as we talk about CapEx versus operating expense is not new technology per se, but technology that's out there in the marketplace that's being used in a new way. So if we look at a virtual visit, part of what you'll see here on the screen is something that really looks familiar, and that's part of the idea. Is it looks like what a professional would be used to in terms of web conferencing or video conferencing in their workplace. It looks like what a patient or a consumer is used to when they're engaging with family and friends over Skype or FaceTime. But what it does that's innovative and different is it starts to bring people into conversation in a way that has not historically happened. So the technology enables a joint conversation that wasn't possible before, and it's what makes a virtual visit and virtual care so powerful. So just by way of example, if we take that post-hospital discharge context and we say that a patient has left the facility and is now going to have a virtual follow-up visit, in that visit, you can have a clinical person from the hospital, a nurse or physician's assistant, for example, speaking with that patient. You can bring in the pharmacist for a conversation to make sure that the patient understands the medication, the regimen, key things that are critical for both the recovery and then, kind of taking it from the other side, the prevention of a readmission. In addition, you can bring in a caregiver or another family member who potentially is there to assist that patient in their recovery. And so if you bring all those people into a conversation, the ability to get clear instruction and understanding, eyes on the patient and visualization so that everybody understands what the care plan is, what the medication regimen is a new type of conversation. It's one that has not been possible without the technology. And then a final comment on this is there is a sizable percentage of the population where English is not their primary language. And so if you can bring in a medically qualified interpreter to that conversation, now you can take the next step in terms of making sure that everybody understands what the care instructions are. And kind of taking another use case or another aspect of virtual care, there's been a lot of investment over the last decade or so in predictive models and how do you start to stratify and segment the population you're caring for. And I think most folks on this call are going to be living it day in and day out, the fact that so much of the effort in care delivery and the expense in care delivery goes to a smaller segment of the population with chronic conditions, comorbidities. And so the ability to use technology to engage and address different segments of the population in a way that is probably been in process now for some time, but I think the solutions can be even more elegant now so that you can tailor via the technology a series of communications with your stratified population across different levels of acuity, different levels of intervention based on each patient's needs. And you're I think, able to leverage that data in a way that potentially you couldn't without the technology. Certainly, a human-delivered program just isn't going to scale, and it's not going to be cost-effective. But now with the technology, you can automate the conversation, start to realize some of that promise of population health management, and the idea of an interactive conversation across the patient and the care team that is ongoing, and not just segmented in a point-by-point scenario. So in addition to the technology delivering automation to population segments, it's creating its own data, which has a host of possibilities for what can you learn from that new data. And beyond just what can you learn from the new data, how can you take advantage of technology to do that learning for you, so you're not investing more human capital resources, but you're taking that technology and extending it even further. So with that, let Matt start to talk about some of the ideas and concepts in machine learning and how that as an emerging technology can deliver more value.
Great, thanks, Mark. So just a quick history lesson to have a little fun this Wednesday. So back in 1950, a gentleman named Alan Turing proposed a method to determine if a machine could actually think in a manner that was indistinguishable from a human being. And the original concept was the Turing test, and it required a human and a computer to communicate only via text on a computer screen, with another human acting as a judge to determine which of those two was human and which of those was machine. And certainly we've come a long way with AI, or artificial intelligence. As an example, I'm sure many of you saw that in May of this year, attendees at Google's developer Confab IO watched as Duplex, or Google Duplex, their new digital assistant, actually mimicked the human voice and made phone calls to book appointments on the behalf of the human actually requesting them. It was for me, it was quite frightening and eerie. And what we've seen is that all these public clouds are investing very heavily and doing really impressive work, and including really investing in technologies that will support a lot of the things that Mark was just referring to. And you can read more about what each cloud is doing in ongoing white papers, and certainly even I get the opportunity to publish them from time to time. As an example, Amazon recently, in the last couple of years, launched Lex, and many of you probably have Alexa in the home, but Lex is the technology behind it, and it's designed to enable developers to build essentially conversational interfaces for applications. And it's powered by the same deep learning technologies that Alexa uses. And last year at reInvent, their large show, they launched a product called SageMaker, their new kind of machine learning technology, and that enables developers or data scientists to deploy machine learning models really at any scale and move it quickly through production so that they can gain insights from data much sooner. The concept there, if we take a step back, is to allow a data scientist to really almost drag and drop what their clinical studies are, or their health case use case studies are, without having to write a line of code. And that really has driven a lot of ongoing cloud adoption, if we go back to the very beginning about the emerging technologies really driving that adoption. Google, of course, has very significant history in AI and machine learning, including Google Cloud Machine Learning Engine that essentially ingests structured or unstructured data into the Google Cloud Platform. And for those of you who aren't familiar, think about structured data sitting inside of a database like a Microsoft SQL database, which most healthcare organizations are probably using some version of SQL or MySQL or Oracle. And then unstructured data, of course, might be text data that was pulled from a software like a Dictate software and pulled into an EMR or EHR, and really be able to ingest that inside of Google Cloud Platform. And Google, of course, offers these things in big data solutions, including an integrated serverless big data platform that ultimately captures, processes, stores, and analyzes the data all within a scalable platform, which is free from those traditional constraints that Mark referred to in regards to that CapEx to OpEx model. And Google, I would tell you, finally also has a technology called DeepMind, which is a well-known machine learning technology that learned to play video games actually in a fashion like humans. And today is being used to find early warning signs of cancer in images, which is a pretty humbling evolution. And it's pretty neat because that's something that, even my oldest son can relate to now, now that he lives in a world of computer games. And now I can explain to him, hey, these technologies can do emerging things for healthcare as well. Finally, Microsoft, one of the earliest pioneers in analytics tools, based on what has become known as Cortana, or the virtual assistant that uses voice command technology across multiple devices. They offer a plethora of pre-configured tooling, and Microsoft was actually one of the first to offer serverless computing with no infrastructure to actually manage. And you would know that if you use Microsoft technology with things like Azure Machine Learning Studio, which actually uses drag and drop technology and publishes models as web services that can easily be consumed by custom apps or business intelligence tools, such even simple things such as Excel. And so obviously that machine learning technology is vast, and it continues to expand almost daily at this point. But what does it actually mean to healthcare? So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to kind of show an overview of what I have seen recently as I have these conversations with really what we know as kind of the 4 Ps, or the 4 verticals across healthcare, at least as ClearData addresses them, being providers, payers, pharmaceutical organizations, and product companies or software vendors. And on the provider side, what we've seen is that doctors and hospitals really have a good best use case for machine learning in cybersecurity. A real big advantage from a machine learning perspective is bringing providers today in help defending the growing threat of things like ransomware, things that you read about in healthcare IT news and those kind of threats that are out there. For image recognition, machine learning is proving to provide consistently correct determinations from image recognition, and in many cases to a better degree than an actual human. And we're starting to see major investments in this area. Microsoft, for example, is succeeding in this area with biomarkers and phenotyping, and the results are driving cancer research forward. And finally, NLP is actually using machine learning to process information into the EHR, and machine learning is helping make sense of these massive data sets that can lead to better decision-making for clinicians. On the payer side, what we see is that the best use cases for machine learning are really radically different in many cases. They are focusing from a machine learning perspective on things like payment and revenue cycle management, participation with HIEs, and patient engagement. In one scenario that I'm involved in, payers are using machine learning to quickly determine how soon, based off of a particular diagnosis, a hospital can get paid for services rendered, and how quickly does that patient get the letter in the mail that tells them what their financial responsibility is and how quickly do they pay it. This way they understand ultimately how to do things like appropriately staff and appropriately understand how they should optimize their invoicing model. On the pharma and life sciences side, what we're seeing is an adoption specifically in enhancing clinical trials. This is just really humbling and exciting for me personally to be involved in the ability for a pharmaceutical or life science organization to use big data analytics, machine learning, to do things like normalize and de-identify patient data. They can then use the data to run machine learning driven trials to understand the outcomes of drugs, and way before it actually hits the market, all without having to test thousands of patients who may have negative side effects from drug trials. And what we're seeing there is really just really radically different and really exciting. And then finally, on the ISV or SaaS side, what we've seen is the ability to use machine learning to create more intelligent applications. Many of even ClearData's customers, as an example, are using machine learning to understand specifically how the patient or doctor uses the application. And in turn, the company's developers can further improve or build different features based off of usability, or they may feed their data into a data lake, as an example, to project and predict scenarios and outcomes. For example, to examine the path of a patient that has a specific disease and has been to a neurologist or an ophthalmologist, and machine learning can determine the likely next step to best serve the patient based off of past learning. And that data then can obviously be fed back into the patient's electronic record. Finally, before I transition it over, I wanted to talk about a practical use for machine learning. And so as we move to the next slide, really wanted to focus on one of the things that I've been researching, which has been a lot around diabetes and diabetes prevention. And obviously, we all know that diabetes is a huge problem in the country. Just to put it in perspective, according to the American Diabetes Association, actually the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, a staggering 100 million Americans have diabetes or prediabetes. The cost of the country is enormous, as we all know, as actual dollars, with $1 out of every $7 spent in healthcare being spent on diabetes or complications around it. And so we know that this is a massive problem, but ultimately, what does this actually have to do with machine learning? And so as we move to the next slide, here are 3 things that I've actually seen healthcare organizations do to start to address this. And machine learning really trying to detect diabetes or prediabetes problems before they actually drive that cost, before they actually require hospitalization for those who have actually contracted the disease. And so just a couple of quick examples. The first one being glucose monitoring. This is it's something that a lot of us, have family members, even at ClearData, that struggle with this. And machine learning algorithms are trying to automate the process of processing and monitoring blood sugar levels, even in your app on your iPhone, which is pretty neat. Being able to tell your loved one, hey, it's time to actually take a dosage based off of the monitoring app. And the nutrition coaching, to recommend meal options based off of what is actually happening real time with the patient, and actually pushing that to a personal device. And then finally, the early diagnosis tools, which is really focused on things like predicting diabetic causes that could really do things like cause vision loss among diabetics. And in the final example, before we kind of move on, Boston University is a recent one that I read about, and their Center for Information and Systems Engineering is using machine learning to actually predict hospitalizations for diabetes a year in advance, with an accuracy rate of 82%. And this last report, actually that we can reference here after the meeting. And working with Boston area hospitals, the center is providing patients anonymized EHR data that's containing all the information that the hospital has about each patient, and then using machine learning technology, the team at the center is actually able to predict who might have been hospitalized. And that gives the hospital time to intervene, including the most aggressive treatment in and out of the patient setting. And there's a kind of a bottom line benefit here. Machine learning is helping us improve the patient outcome while reducing the overall cost of diabetic care. And so that's one of the exciting things that I think about when I think about the machine learning use case. But look, none of this would actually be possible, and it wouldn't be adopted without a really strong user experience. And I know Mark's got a lot of passion around user experience. So Mark, would you mind walking us through that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Matt. I think, with all of the exciting innovation and emerging technology, adoption and usage is critical, right, for realizing the value of it. And so, the kind of the jargon that we use around software and technology is the user experience. But that phrase really is what is an individual's interaction with any product or service, whether that is a human delivered service or if it's a product that they hold physically in their hands and utilize. Organizations spend a lot of time trying to deliver the most positive user experience for their customers. And, I think us in healthcare are no different. We want patients to be satisfied. We want them to be engaged with the care that's being delivered, because that's going to help drive the best outcomes for themselves as individuals, but also for the providers and payers that are supporting that individual. But we also look at technology that is scattered throughout all of these large healthcare organizations. Matt was just going through kind of how ClearData stratifies healthcare organizations. But if you think about what is the profile of any one of those companies, they're large companies with large IT organizations, significant investments in technology. And the experience for each employee or each colleague and user of that technology is equally important for realizing the value. So if we think about just one example, and we could go through a whole lot, but let's think about EHRs and that adoption curve over the last decade or so. A tremendous amount of value that is being delivered by EHR systems and by the data being collected, some of the machine learning that Matt just talked about, is really being enabled by the implementation and rollout of EHRs and the standardization and the structure of the data that facilitates. But I think certainly anybody who's listening to this who has been part of a healthcare provider, you also know the pain that you've gone through to adopt this technology. And even now, there's still probably a lot of value yet to be derived because it's such a steep learning curve and a very complex implementation. So as we look at how do we take advantage of new emerging technologies, I think part of what we all want to keep in mind is how can we make the user experience from every constituency improved, more intuitive, and so that the value is realized more quickly and the adoption happens more intuitively. So, let's just look at a couple of examples as we kind of move on from the EHR example. I think one thing that's an interesting intersection with emerging technology is also this concept of consumer or commodity technology. So if we look at, Pew Research statistics, and they're always a great source for looking at how both the population as a whole, but then also specific demographics are adopting technology. And I think you could take almost any technology and see very similar curves. But if we think about our current context of everything from internet usage to smartphones and tablets and social media, it's a pretty, as you see on the slide here, there's just a pretty aggressive adoption rate. And, these are the tools and technologies that everybody is familiar with, whether you're a physician, whether you're a care manager, whether you're an IT person, or whether you're an individual patient. You're engaging with these technologies and devices as part of your daily living. And so how can you take these emerging technologies and start to deliver the value if you can use everyday consumer paradigms and technology as the entry point or delivery point? And I think that's a lot of what is going to really help drive better outcomes and deliver the value. And just by way of a couple of examples of, what does a particular user experience look like from, a given perspective. One thing that's possible and enabled in this emerging technology is, for example, communicating to a patient in their primary language, something that is delivered through a consumer technology and a well-established technology in an SMS message on a smartphone. But if you can actually utilize the machine learning and utilize the cloud and utilize more robust data around that patient, now the potential for delivering specific care follow-ups or care instructions to them, but doing it in their primary language based on what you know and how you've constructed your content and your virtual care, now lets you communicate more clearly, more effectively, and really start to close some of the historic gaps in patient response. And then just as a second example, if we look at things from a provider perspective, as these solutions take advantage of really integrating both operational workflow as well as technology and data, I think potential to highlight new learnings and to act on them is also there. So again, one of the challenges that's longstanding, and we used the example earlier of post-hospital discharge and really how to engage that patient once they leave your facility. One of the challenges, okay, if we've got a population leaving every single day and we're trying to sort of chase them, how do we prioritize a limited set of resources so that we're making sure that we're intervening and engaging with the most at-risk people? And if you can take advantage of some of the technology and highlight some of the data so that you can start to look at who have we been out of contact with and who out of that no contact population is highest at risk, now you can start to use some of those precious staff and colleagues and human capital resources, if you will, to really try to close those most critical gaps and make intelligent decisions for people who are likely to be able to manage their care more effectively on their own, even if perhaps you have not had a chance to engage with them. So being able to deliver meaningful, actionable data and insights is certainly something that's important. So it's not just the technology for the sake of new connections and communications, but really enabling improvements and efficiencies in the workflow of care delivery. And that, from a post-hospital discharge perspective, also meets compliance and starts to meet compliance needs. So let me hand it over to Matt to finish up with some of the other things that can help from a technology perspective from compliance.
Thanks, Mark. So as I think about the last piece that I said there, and actually Mark dovetailed into it, these technologies, whether it's the machine learning components or just cloud in general, couldn't be adopted without great user experience. And in healthcare, clearly they should not be adopted, at least with any kind of responsibility if you have PHI, without some kind of understanding of compliance. And compliance is changing, it's living, and it's a living, breathing thing. And it can be quite intimidating, especially as public cloud services are consistently doing new releases. As an example, I was, humbled enough to be on stage at Amazon's big show reInvent, this past fall, and they launched over 70 new features and services in a 3-day period, right? And so how does a healthcare organization stay up to date with that? And how do you do it when you have ever-changing requirements from a compliance and regulatory perspective as well, thinking about things like GDPR? And so what this is an example of how we take a lot of those emerging trends in technology that Mark and I have been talking about and bubble it into a view. And that view is what's known as a compliance dashboard, which is, as you can see here, red, yellow, green. How compliant am I against various standards that I may be facing? Maybe you're a pharmaceutical organization, you're facing GXP or good manufacturing processes, GMP, or maybe you are a healthcare organization that's simply worried about HIPAA, which is probably the majority of you folks out there. And the truth is, getting real-time data to show how compliant am I against things like, do I have encryption going on inside of my data lake all the time? Do I have backups that have integrity? Have I run a vulnerability scan across my data recently? Becomes critically important, not only for your CIO's peace of mind, but also, candidly, the time of audit, right? Being able to download and show these reports to ultimately check the box that your patients are indeed. And so that's ultimately the concept behind what actually ClearData has built with a compliance dashboard, ultimately trying to drive insight into what's actually happening inside of your cloud. This became a reality by accident. This became a reality because even myself running data centers thought about when I get rid of that data, to one of Mark's earlier comments, when I move from CapEx to OpEx and I give up control and I can't really feel and touch my data and I can't drive to my data center, how do I actually know what's happening, inside of the four walls? And how do I know who has access from an identity and access management perspective to my environment, these kind of things? And so really developed by accident and now has become kind of paramount to how a healthcare organization can get insight into, their ultimately their culture of compliance, as I would call it. As we move to the final slide here in a second, what I wanted to talk about was really kind of the healthcare needs that I'm seeing in the space from a cloud technology perspective. And what you can see on the screen here is really some of the use cases that we're seeing both on the operational and clinical side, which you can see on the left around things like collaborating using data anonymization and data lakes from a payer provider perspective to share data, and ultimately driving cost efficiencies throughout the environment. And on the right side, really thinking about new revenue streams from healthcare organizations that are adopting things like software as a service or SaaS applications, where they can provide more value add to their patients or their consumers in a SaaS model, and really do that in an innovative and agile fashion. What I'm seeing ultimately on the trend side as well is, of course, just a tremendous amount of momentum and data from wearables or wellness applications or home sensors that are really driving a lot of big data adoption, that are really driving a lot of research into what are you actually doing with that application, or what is your daily routine as it relates to the wearable that you have, and how are you actually using the data? And ultimately, that's going to result in a lot more insight when it comes to things like telehealth, where they're starting to do things like integrate with these things so that they can get more proactive data rather than have to make you sit down inside of a doctor's office and fill out a survey each and every time. And that's one of the exciting things about, as I think about this topic. And ultimately, this is all leading into what's in the middle there, those healthcare cloud solutions. And that is really around how do we modernize healthcare? How do we modernize the infrastructure so that healthcare organizations can really start to adopt these next gen? And even if they don't want to, and they still want to use more traditional technologies like infrastructure as a service, how do they do that in a compliant fashion? And that's really one of the things that we try to focus on as we try to modernize healthcare organizations inside of ClearData. And so with that, I certainly want to turn it back over to Anna Marie, and thank you both Anna Marie and Mark for the opportunity. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Mark, for presenting on today's topic regarding emerging technologies in healthcare. We'll pause for a couple seconds. If there's any questions which our webinar participants have, please feel free to type them in the chat window and we'll answer them one by one. In the meantime, I will share a brief overview about the two webinar sponsors, ClearData and Synzi. Healthcare professionals across the globe trust the ClearData HITRUST certified cloud to safeguard their sensitive data and power their critical applications, available across major public cloud platforms. For healthcare organizations, customers receive the most comprehensive BAA in the industry, combined with market-leading healthcare exclusive security and compliance solutions. ClearData's innovative solutions protect customers from data privacy risks, improve their data management, and scale their healthcare IT infrastructure, enabling the industry to focus on making healthcare better by improving healthcare delivery. Synzi is a technology company dedicated to providing better ways for you to manage and engage colleagues, patients, and members simply and efficiently. Synzi goes beyond traditional telehealth with this award-winning virtual care communication platform for providers to use to engage their colleagues and their patients or members with video, secure messaging, text, and/or email. The platform allows virtual visits and virtual consults to be conducted on any smartphone, tablet, or computer, and on any level of cellular or Wi-Fi connectivity. We will notify all attendees when today's recorded webinar is available for future reference. Thank you, everyone, for your time and interest. This concludes our presentation today.